Welcome to A Slob Comes Clean, the podcast. I'm Dana White. I blog over at aslobcomesclean.com. That's where I share my personal deslobification process. As I figure out ways to keep my own home under control, I share the truth about cleaning and organizing strategies that actually work in real life for real people, people who don't necessarily love cleaning and organizing. Thanks for joining me today. This is podcast number 121. And it's a part 2 from last week, but you don't have to listen to last week first because anyway. I'm talking about letting go of dreams today. Last week specifically, I talked about small dreams. Not that they always feel small, but when I was talking about small dreams, what I was talking about was those dreams of who you thought maybe that you would be one day. So we're talking today about big dreams. Before I go on, I always like to mention that I'm also the author of the book, How to Manage Your Home Without Losing Your Mind. In the book, I go through the development of the habits that will make a shocking difference in your home. Like, shocking. It shocked me. Personally, that's why I've ended up writing a book about it. The impact that such basic, simple habits can have or will have. Like, it's just a fact. They will have on a home. There's also, the biggest section is on decluttering and realistic strategies for getting rid of clutter in your home. Yes. And doing it from the perspective of the person who would rather hold on to every last thing. Anyway, okay, so we're talking about giving up on dreams. Last week we talked about small ones, which, like I said, don't always feel big, and how this is different for everybody. What may be a big dream to one person is a small dream to others. But specifically when we're talking about big dreams, the question that I got about asking me to do a podcast on this was from someone who is dealing with what I consider to be one of the hardest dreams to give up on. And the reality of how much grief and grieving is involved in the decluttering when it involves that. And specifically, the person asking the question was asking about just going through that process when you've realized you're not going to have any more kids, even though she had always wanted to have more children and she'd held on to things, kids' clothes, maternity clothes. She'd held on to those things and toys and all that, hoping that she would have another child. But now, due to just her life stage and her age and all that, she decided that she'd realized it wasn't going to happen. And so she was going through that and just wanted to talk about that. And I think the most important thing there to realize is that it is an actual grieving process. Sometimes we think that it's only people, like, losing people that requires a real grief process, but losing ideas or having it just like feel like a slap in your face when you realize that an idea isn't, you have to give up on that. It requires a real grieving process too. One of my best friends, we were talking, she was newly married and I'd been married maybe a year and a half at that point. And we were just having this conversation about marriage, and she just, was saying how, we were both just kind of going through times where our marriages themselves were good, but it's like this, we were shocked at how we felt about, our in-laws. I don't want to say because I have a great relationship with my in-laws now, and so does she. But just this reality of, it was hard. It was hard interacting with them and figuring things out. I mean, my husband's and my biggest fight we ever had in our entire marriage was over figuring out how things were going to work, for our first Thanksgiving, our first holiday after we'd gotten married, our first like big, you get together with, and it turned out it was over it didn't even matter, but it's like we just had so many things. And then finding the way that our parents reacted to things that really surprised us. Anyway, I'm going off on that. And if you're married, I think you probably know what I'm talking about. You just kind of go, oh, and she gave such wise words that someone else had told her. And that was, she's like, so-and-so explained to me that when you get married, you go through a grieving process because you are looking at things in your own marriage and you're trying to do things correctly. And it reveals to you what you thought was normal in your own family, but was actually unhealthy. And it's like you're grieving kind of that veil that's over your childhood is, oh, everything was perfect and wonderful. And then because you're putting together a new family with this person who had their own family background and you're comparing notes and going, wow, such and such may not have actually been the very best way to do something. And then they do the same thing from their side and just kind of grieving this change and this loss of perspective and change. And I thought it was so wise, and realizing that was a thing was very helpful to me in my marriage, for me to not just go, why is it that all of a sudden these things that I always thought were normal and now I find out they're not that we had anything major in either of our families, but it's just little things of maybe the way that parents interacted with each other, the way for my husband and I, it was, seeing the way his parents had interacted with one another in disagreements versus my parents. And anyway, I'm going on and on, but the point was how real it was to grieve looking at something in a different way. Like how I had always looked at something and now I realize that maybe the way I had looked at something was not exactly right. And there's grief in that. There's going through that. And so how much more is it realistic that it's actually grief that you're dealing with if you are moving from one phase of life to another and accepting that what you thought was going to happen is never going to happen? That's real. And it's not just something where you say, oh, well, I got to get over it. This is just life. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's true. All of that is true. And there's value in looking at it that way. But sometimes just having it validated that it's an actual grieving process helps. And going through and maybe look up what is the grieving process. I don't have it in front of me because y'all know I don't roll that way. But, there's the reality of grief is denial. One of the phases is denial. How many times do clutter issues have something to do with living in denial? Oh my word, I'm the queen of living in denial. Deny reality. That's one of my phrases that I used to say a lot when I was younger. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to think about reality. And so things just piled up because I don't want to think about the fact that that phase of my life is over and has gone on, so that's a very realistic stage of grief. But, one of the things I've heard about from a lot of people who are experts in the area of grief is you have to walk through it. You cannot go around it. There's nothing, but you have to walk through it, and it's painful and it's not fun. But you have to walk on through it or you will never get past it. The only way to get through grief is to actually walk through it. And, other phases of grief that I know I have heard people talk about are, there's anger, frustration. Anger is an actual phase of grief. My mother, when my grandfather died in a car accident, right before my sophomore year of college. And when I say right before, I mean I was late getting to college because I had to stay home for the funeral. And it was really, it was tough. And he was leaving our house, my family's house. Actually, it was before cell phones, and the hospital had called and I was home by myself, and I didn't have a car with me at the time, even though I technically had a car, but I guess somebody who was using it or it was in the shop or something. And it was a really traumatic time. But my mother felt responsibility, not that she was responsible in any way, but that, it was just, when he was leaving our house, he and my grandmother, and they had an accident. He died, and they came to, all the relatives came to our house because they were going back up to Oklahoma. Well, this had all happened by our house. So, they had, my mother and my dad were the ones who had to call all of her brothers and sisters. There were 5 of them, and tell them what had happened. And then everybody, comes to our house. And it was a really hard time. I know I'm going on and on, but, my mom felt a lot of extra additional pressure than she might have felt if the situation had been different. And, and she went through this time period and she really struggled with, why she wasn't crying as much. And then she went through some sort of a class. It was several years later, and she was taking a few classes at a seminary near us, and which she doesn't do often, but anyway, she went through a phase and did that. But she took these classes, and something was with family history or something like that. And it was like she was completely shocked when in the middle of something, she just started sobbing and grieving, and she was furious. She was really angry over this situation, the fact of that he shouldn't have been driving, and, things like that. And it just was something that she had to go through, even though it had been several years since it had happened. And yet at some point it's going to happen. You have to go through grief. And here I am talking about this from the perspective of someone who has not experienced these things in the way that I know so many of you have. But we've all experienced some sort of grief somewhere. And so when you can kind of take it and go, okay, yeah, there is a similarity between this type of grief and the grieving of giving up a dream and the decluttering that's involved in that. And know that those things have similarities there. I don't like talking about stuff like this because I know for a fact that so many of you have been through these things, and from personal experience the truth and the reality of this. And I don't want to act like I know what you're going through. So I'm just going through the basic. This is the reality. Grief is real. There's a real process to go through with grief. You have to walk through it. And giving up on a big dream and decluttering, there's real grief in that. And I want to validate you in that. And we're not even talking here about specifically decluttering things in the kind of grief where you've lost someone precious to you. That's not even what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about realizing that same kind of grief, there is a different form of it. It's not the same. We're not comparing it in any way, but there's also grief that happens here in these situations where you're giving up on a dream. So, okay. I feel like I've been super preachy and serious, and I'm sorry about that. But basically, it comes down to this: paralysis. I have paralysis for goofy reasons, and I have paralysis for real reasons. I have paralysis when I just look around and my kid's room is a foot deep in random stuff all over the floor. I mean, I'll experience decluttering paralysis there. Well, there's also decluttering paralysis that is a whole lot more serious with this issue of, when do I decide that I have to get rid of all this stuff? So this kind of goes along with sentimental decluttering, which I've had a podcast about before. But some examples of this, like the person asking the question, wanted to have more kids, and has finally realized that was not going to happen. For some people, it's their giving up on a career, a vision of what you thought you were going to be one day. This person originally, she thought she was going to have multiple children, and it didn't happen. You thought you were going to have a career and you had everything for that, and then life just changed things, maybe through deciding that you were going to stay home with your kids, maybe through getting laid off and that dream just being ripped away and it was no decision of yours. Those things are all real grieving processes. So how do you deal with it? Well, anytime that there's paralysis, anytime you have decluttering paralysis, the best thing to do is just to somehow make yourself move. I mean, when we're talking about paralysis, we're talking about, not being able to move. So what is it that you can do? What is it that I can do a little something and get started on? So looking at it and saying, I am not going to deal with all the things that, in my mind, that entire wardrobe full of, business stuff that I spent thousands of dollars on. And now I've lost that job. I don't have that job anymore. And it just, whatever. I'm not going to worry about those. I'm just going to worry about trash. It's like that my thing, I don't know if you've watched, I put up a new YouTube video. It's been a while of my own decluttering projects, but put up a new YouTube video. And the thing I had to remind myself over and over and over again, one of my main rules is I have to look. I have to look. I assume I know, and I am usually completely wrong. Okay. I'm just so often wrong, and I have to make myself look. I have to look. So even if it is, yes, these are the things that I spent thousands of dollars on, I just cannot possibly get rid of all this stuff because I'm really, really hoping I'm going to go back to work. Okay. Well, then go and look for trash. What's trash in your wardrobe? Well, it's stained stuff, ripped stuff that maybe you made it work because you did wear those things all the time, but now you're like, oh yeah, realistically, that is actually trash. Making myself go through and look at things. With the baby stuff, that's very difficult. But I find when it's in a big mass of stuff, I assume it's all completely sentimental. And instead go through and just say, well, what do I actually feel no emotion about? These stained onesies, I'm sorry. I have memories of that orange poop that, breastfed babies have, that is like explosive and crazy. But the stains that are still on a thing or two here or there, I don't have emotions toward those. I don't want to keep those. Do I want to keep this one that actually brings back all these memories of the first time we took them to church and blah, blah, blah? Yes, of course I want to keep that. But if I can get rid of just some of the stuff and say, I'm not going to worry about the stuff that rips my heart out right now. Instead, I'm just going to make myself go through it. I'm going to let myself feel the grief feelings that I'm feeling. And I'm going to just get rid of the stuff that's obvious and duh. Or maybe there's a little moment of, you know what? I always hated this outfit that so-and-so gave me and kept asking me if the kid was wearing it because they thought it was great and I thought it was hideous. And like, I actually get a little bit of joy about throwing that one in the trash or giving it in the donate box or whatever. But, saying I'm just going to go through it. I've got to just look through it. Even if that means that you go through it and you don't end up really getting rid of all that much. Just going through it. I'm just going to touch everything in here, get rid of the completely obvious stuff. And then that sets me up for re-decluttering later on. Okay. Even if I'm going to go through it right now, I'm going to look through everything because I'm keeping this because I think I have this amazing attachment to it. Maybe I go through everything and I really can't get rid of any of this. There's something about going through it now. Even though I'm convinced, even as I'm doing it and really looking at things, yes, I got rid of a couple things, but most of it, I just don't think I can get rid of it. Something about having done that and then coming back to it 6 months or a year, even 2 years later, whatever, allows me to have a very different perspective because I did go through it once already. The second time I go through it, there is something that has shifted in my brain. Can I explain it? No, I think I've already proven during this podcast that I am no psychologist, okay? But as I go through it that second time, I view things differently than I did the first time. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I had all these feelings, or I had all these assumptions that I had feelings on this one. And now that it's been a year, I'm like, yeah, I don't actually have any feelings about that. And there's something that changes in my brain the second time I go through something. So letting yourself say, I'm going to go through it today. And I'm not putting pressure on myself to make these huge, huge decisions, but I am going to go through it and just see if there's anything that is just obvious and duh to me. Like one shoe from a pair that you can't even remember them ever having worn. Or, there's all kinds of stuff. Or, oh, wow, there was an entire bag in here that I had meant to declutter because I absolutely hated them. And they were hand-me-downs and my kid never even wore them. And for some reason, the bag never got donated. It just stayed in the big stuff. Things like that happen in my world. Maybe they don't happen in your world, but they happen in mine. And that is one of the reasons why I've realized it's always, always worth it for me to just go through it. And going through it is moving. Even if I'm convinced I'm not actually going to get rid of anything by going through it is still moving, and that moves me toward being able to declutter it. That breaks through that decluttering paralysis. Okay. Other things to consider. Did I really? Okay, here we go with my notes and everything. Hold on, I'm going to pause real quick while I try to figure out what I was talking about. Okay, another thing to consider is, do I really hope for this to happen, or is it just a maybe? Okay, and what I mean by that is, I have some teaching staff. I'm hoping not to go back to teaching. I'll just be honest. When people would say, hey, so you think you're going to go back to teaching once your kids are in school? And I was like, no. Of course, I had this, thing that I do now, leading this community of people who struggle, as a replacement for that. But it's like, am I actually hoping, or is it just wondering what if maybe, so kind of trying to identify between those two things. Is this a maybe, or is this something that I truly, truly am hoping will happen, and sometimes identifying that will let me get rid of things. Other things to consider, and this is, back to that container concept, is, do I have the space? Does the container that is my home, that needs to contain both my family, meaning we've got to be able to move around, live, do what we need to do, cook meals, do homework on a table that's clear so there's actually a space to do it on. Are we able to move the way that we need to move and do the things that we need to do with this stuff in the house? Or is this thing that is a dream, realistically, is it keeping us from living right now? Because that is the thing I've really had to let go of, and that has let me get rid of a lot of things that were dreams for me, was going, well, but I really want to live right now, and realizing the value of open space. First of all, don't forget, this is not the stuff to start with. Let me just remind you of that. There's a podcast called Decluttering Momentum that at least several people have said they listen to over and over and over, because don't start with this stuff. But when you go start with the easy stuff, the whatever, the trash, the stuff you hate, all that kind of stuff. All these things are in the book, and all these things are on the blog, and all these things are things that I say again and again. But I want to make sure you remember, you don't start with these things, okay? But as I get to it, and as I have decluttered the easy stuff, the obvious stuff, as I have, gotten rid of the clothes that we don't need right now and didn't cause anything emotional, and I get to these things, I have to ask myself, can I fit these things in the container that is my home or not? Just keeping this huge box of teaching stuff, or this huge, let's be honest, if you were a teacher, you know what I'm talking about. These huge 17 boxes of teaching stuff, is keeping that making us not able to function in the life that we're actually living right now. And having that perspective has changed a lot of things for me and how I view my clutter. Do you have room for it? If you have room for one when I say teaching, it's just because that's the career that I had. But I know for a lot of people, there's, whatever your career was that you were really into, that you're just not convinced you're never going to go back to, or you dream of going back to, or you hope to go back to. How much space do you have? If you have a wardrobe that it just rips your heart out to think of getting rid of it, then look at that space in your closet and say, well, do I have room for the clothes I'm actually wearing right now? And if you don't have room for the clothes you're actually wearing because of that, then that's where you need to say, this is a container. It does not expand for however many clothes I have. And so I have to declutter down to the point where everything fits into this container, this natural limit that is the size of my closet. So, do you have the space? Is it all together? That's another thing too, is sometimes for people like me, it's just, I know it's in there. I know I've got a bunch of stuff from such and such phase of life, and I just don't want to even get started because the whole house is a complete disaster. And instead say, okay, well, I'm just going to put it all together. I'm going to consolidate. Things that have been outgrown, I'm going to put all the clothes together, and I'm going to put all the toys together and all that. And then seeing everything together often helps me see which things I really love, and lets me see which things I'm willing to put in my container to designate container space too, of the garage or the storage shed or whatever, the attic. But having that perspective, putting things together always changes how I view certain things. Because I start to see, oh, wow, yeah, I knew I had baby stuff and I loved my baby stuff, but I don't have a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings toward that much baby stuff when I see it all together. Also being willing to keep some things, okay? And, if it is a phase of life and part of it is that you truly do still have a hope that it could happen, looking at things as remembering what it was like when you were collecting those things. And thinking about those, because you probably know some people in your life who thought they were done having kids and then ended up having more. And think about that. The people who just delighted in giving them things or handing things on to them, or, are things, all cribs. Basically, I'm pretty sure we sold our crib right before they made whatever law it was that you couldn't even resell cribs anymore. Is it even something that you would use again if by chance something did end up happening and that dream became reality again? But looking at things from that perspective and remembering how much fun it was to collect things and how much fun it was to gather all that stuff the first time. And maybe you're in a different place financially. We're in a different place financially if we were to have a baby. Oh my word. How can I say that out loud? But we're not. But anyway, we're in a very different place financially than we were in the beginning. And I think right now, for one thing, my perspective has changed on what all a baby actually needs, which is a whole lot less than I thought. And for another thing, yeah, we could afford to go out and get the things we needed. And I'm sure we'd get things from friends and all that kind of stuff too. So it helps me change how I view that. Another thing too is just the reality of fashion. And next week I have a guest on my podcast and the sound is actually decent. I'm so excited. Anyway, but she's talking about, decluttering your closet. She's a fashion expert. And anyway, so she, talking about that and thinking about that and the reality of the things I wore when I was teaching, that was 2001, y'all. Or maybe it was 2002. Yeah, so I was teaching in 2002. Styles have really, really changed. And even sometimes, I was talking about this with somebody else, but maybe it was on the podcast, so you'll hear it twice if I did. But there's something about, I have a 15-year-old and I have a 13-year-old. They're 20 months apart. Those 20 months were when maternity styles changed drastically. Like they'd all, they always change a little bit, but they changed completely and totally. And I'm telling you, it was Kelly Ripa. Kelly Ripa got on to Regis right around that same time. She was pregnant. She wore all these really tight clothes. And I mean, the styles were just completely different in less than 2 years for maternity clothes. And so realistically looking back, even though I have fond memories of looking super cute in that maternity outfit, which I have gotten rid of all of that now, but even though I have fond memories of looking really cute in that, realistically now it wouldn't be cute anymore. And a lot of that with, some of your old work clothes or things like that, or even baby clothes. My niece is 17 and my daughter is 10. And my sister-in-law had given me some clothes of my nieces, and some of them worked, but there was a lot of style change in that time period. And I remember my daughter, who, if you know my daughter, she is her own person, which is exactly what I've always prayed for. And so thank you, Lord. Anyway, but she's really strange about clothes. She either goes berserk and crazy and wears these wild, crazy things, or she is all about the t-shirt that's 10 sizes too big and big baggy pants, whatever, being comfortable. She's a lot like me. Anyway, so when she was 13 months old, there was this dress that I remembered my niece wearing. Okay, so my niece, who was 7 years older, I remember her wearing this dress, and I loved this dress, and I was excited that it was in the bag of hand-me-downs that I got from my sister-in-law, and I had been wanting my daughter to wear this, but when I looked at it, I was like, yeah, this actually isn't really in style. It wasn't. I mean, it wasn't horrendous or hideous or anything like that, but it was not the current style. And my daughter went through this phase, which is completely different than she is now, but she went through this phase around 1 and 2 where she would only wear dresses. She would not wear anything but a dress, only dresses. Well, I pulled out this dress. So she likes to wear dresses. I pull out a dress. She was 13, 14 months old. She was so young. I could not believe she even cared. Anyway, and I was like, okay, sweetie, you want to wear this dress? And she looked at me with this look that you wouldn't even think a baby that young could give. And she just goes, no. It was so not in style to her at that young age. And she was just like, no. And she loved dresses. And it just was one of those times where I went, yeah, styles really do change over fairly short periods of time, and so realizing, yeah, I wouldn't actually put a new baby in this. Not that I can't save something if it does bring back specific memories, but that dress had no actual memories for me. I had just looked forward to my daughter wearing it. Well, that was very easy to get rid of because, once she reacted to that, I mean, I really still can't believe that because she's a very expressive child. But looking at that, it really just helped me see, so why would I hold on to this? Because we're not actually going to use it. So trying to look at things through that perspective. And I know if you're in the middle of the grieving process, some of these things sound very trite, okay? But the goal is to go through the grieving process, to let yourself go through it. I have a post about it's okay to be sad. I got rid of a bookshelf that I had painted for my daughter. It was actually something that I shared on the blog early in the blog. I had just painted it, and then over time, it just was not working in her room. It just was causing more problems than anything because it was kind of a bookshelf shaped like a dollhouse, but it wasn't really a dollhouse, and she had a dollhouse that she liked to play with, so she didn't actually use it as a dollhouse, and because the top was a roof, it wasn't actually a shelf, and so it just hadn't worked. We tried it in all different ways. We'd put it in different places, and it was time to get rid of it, and I just said, you know what? I'm going to let myself feel really sad over this. I made it. For me, it was pretty good art. I am not an artist. But sometimes acknowledging that it's going to be hard and not saying, why is this so hard for me? This isn't hard for other people. It's not hard for everyone, but it's hard for you, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean we don't go through it, because the only way to get past it, the only way to get your house to the point where you feel you love your home and you can live comfortably in your home, is to get the things out that are in the way of you being able to live comfortably in your home. Okay. If it's not in the way, then okay, maybe you can put it off a little longer. But if it's truly in the way and you're tripping over boxes and you're not able, your kid doesn't really have a room that they can actually enjoy because it's filled with boxes of maybes for the future, then those are the times to go through it, do what's easy, let yourself go through things. Always, always, always look. Don't assume what's in there. Go through, touch every piece, and acknowledge the ones that, oh yeah, actually I don't care about that at all. I can get rid of that, and consolidate and make things into a smaller thing. Put these into a smaller container as opposed to, 7 containers. Maybe you can get it down to 2. Acknowledge the things that, oh, actually, yeah, we wouldn't use that again, even if we did need it or whatever. So I hope this helps. Like I said, I'm not a psychologist. I have not, been through what the person asking the question had been through. So these are just thoughts. And I don't ever want to assume that I know what you're going through. Because let me tell you, the person who struggles with clutter, the most hurtful and offensive thing is when people are like, oh yeah, I totally get that. And this is what I did. And it was so easy. Yeah, that's not that's not effective with me at all. So I hope you don't think that I'm doing that, because I'm not. I'm just trying to give you some ideas and things to think about. I would love to hear from you. Maybe stories of things that you've had to, dreams that you've had to give up on that, that you've, yeah. One of the other issues, a big dream that I hear from a lot of you on is, when you go through chronic illness, when you, succumb to something that you realize is the rest of your life, and giving up on what you were capable of at one point. And it's hard, it's hard. And I just want to validate you that it is hard, and that, there's ways to keep on moving. I'm not going to tell you to get over it, but I am going to encourage you to keep on moving, because it's the only way you will eventually get past, is keep on moving. So I hope this has been helpful. I would love to hear from you. And also too, did want to just remind you again, that if you are a patron, which I love it. Thank you so much, those of you who are. If you have not seen your invitation to the Facebook group, if you have actually filled out the form, email me, Dana@aslobcomesclean.com, and I will help you with that, because I know there are several of you who've been invited to the private secret Facebook group and have not joined it yet. So I know that there's something going on there. So anyway, and then another thing too is there are... I have a book tour survey. So I'm going to be trying to put together a book tour coming up soon. And I would love for you to fill out the survey. If you are, you can let me know. I mean, hey, I've had lots of you fill it out in Australia, and that's a dream of mine. So fill it out anyway. But just let me know, kind of what, well, this form tells you, but what cities you're near, what state you're in, if you personally have any access to a space that you could, help us use for a get together or whatever. I would appreciate it if you'd let me know. So anyway, I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes for this, and I will talk to you guys next week.